So nice to be with all of you today and to see all of you again this year. And the question that I want you to ponder today for the next 15 minutes is, can blue foods transform the global food system? And so just to get started, I want to give a context of what the problem is that makes me come to work every day. And briefly, it's that our global food system is broken. You just have to look around. You see obesity and overweight everywhere. The cheapest and most affordable calories are rich in starch and fat and sugars, and leading to also diabetes, coronary disease, and so forth. And at the same time, side by side, we see hunger. So the report last year out of the United Nations was 1 in 11 people globally experienced hunger, 1 in 5 in Africa experienced hunger. And if that just seems too far away for you, think about the Silicon Valley and one of the most wealthy communities in the country. The Second Harvest Food Bank, which is one of the biggest food banks here, serves 500,000 people each week. So when you look at the population here, depending on where you draw the boundaries, that's 12 to 15% of the people in Silicon Valley are using that food bank. And a number of our students are too. So it's really startling. And when you pull back and just look at some of these global numbers coming out of the State of the Food Insecurity report last year, a third of the people around the globe can't afford a healthy diet. And in low-income countries, 70%. I guess I was really struck by the fact that an estimated 30% of women in reproductive age suffer from anemia, which is a debilitating condition. And we still have 15% of people globally that are obese. And that number is rising and not falling. So nutritionally, we clearly have a major problem. And then that's on top of the environmental problems that I've been studying quite a bit. The environmental impacts of fertilization and dead zones and pesticides, the climate impacts, biodiversity impacts, food safety, food waste, you can go on and on. So in 2021, the UN Food System Summit focused for the first time on food system transformation, trying to meet the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. And it was the first time they brought blue foods into the discussion. So blue foods, which I'm defining as fish and shellfish, seaweed, other plants and animals that are either cultivated or captured in marine and freshwater environments. All of those foods had been kind of considered a resource issue to be managed, not part of our crop and livestock, the food system, but now obviously integrated. And I like to think, and I think it's true, that the Blue Food Assessment, which was a big international effort run out of Stanford, Center on Ocean Solutions and Food Security and the Environment, as well as the Stockholm Resilience Center. I co-chaired that with Bia Krona out of Stockholm. We involved 100 researchers from around 25 institutions to do the empirical work, to put the numbers behind how important is our blue foods for nutrition, to the environment, to smallholders, to food justice, and so forth. And there's a reason why we wanted to look at this. Obviously, seafood demand has been rising rapidly. When you look at the past 30 years or so, 1990 to 2020 here, per capita seafood consumption has gone up from 13 to 20 kilograms per capita. Meanwhile, we added 2.6 billion people to the globe, so well over doubling of seafood demand. And almost all of that has been met by aquaculture. And my specialty is in aquaculture, for the purposes of this talk anyway, and so that's what I want to bring to the table. When you look at the data on seafood production, these are 1950 to 2020, and I've drawn a line to 1990 for that same reference point, you can see almost all of the production has come from aquaculture. The dark red in top is from freshwater systems, and the pink is from marine systems. And the blue is our capture fisheries, the wild capture, and they have been stagnant for many decades. And this is in live weight. But when we think about consumption and what we eat, it's in edible weight. And I led the demand paper for the Blue Food Assessment. And when we look at the trends here, the dark blue is seafood consumption for the period 1960 to 2020. And you can see it rising and coming at the same point as poultry consumption. So in edible weight, we can now compare it to other meats in the market, because now they're measured the same. And that incredible rise that we've seen has been due to aquaculture putting more supplies in the market at affordable prices for more people in the global south as well as the global north to be able to consume. And it's also a trend in people wanting healthier foods. So that pink line is the decline in beef consumption globally. So when we look at blue foods, it's not just one little category. It's incredibly complex because it's about 2,500 species and species groups and provides all sorts of important micronutrients, healthy fatty acids, vitamins to all income groups. And also, as I mentioned, an alternative to red meat and reduces cardiovascular disease. So there's an obvious reason when we're trying to fix the global food system to look at blue foods. But I want to just step back for a moment and tell you a little bit about my personal story on what inspired me to get into this and how it evolved a little bit. I did my PhD research in Indonesia, and at the time, in the mid-1980s, we were looking at the impact of the Green Revolution technologies on rural income growth and poverty reduction. And I came into this really from concern about global inequities and poverty. And it was an incredible success by those measures, more than a doubling of yields, very rapid income growth across the rural populations in Indonesia. But during my interviews, I interviewed one woman farmer who told me she had another job as a seamstress at home. And I got talking to her. I said, well, I would love for you to make me a skirt out of the local batik material. And she invited me to her house and went to her house and sat at the table with her family and talking. And at the end of the table was her son, who was eating like this big bowl of rice. And he was thin and kind of just slumped over and listlessly kind of eating. And I said to her, is he all right? And she said, oh, he's not sick. No, he's fine. He's just always tired. And it really struck me at that moment that you can have enough calories but not have enough nutrition. And that goes way back. And so when I think about it, and I still have that skirt, it doesn't fit me anymore, but it still hangs in my closet, as a reminder, it's not just food, it's nutrition that we're talking about. And now I've had several projects in Indonesia over the decades, and I'm now involved in the Blue Food Assessment in Indonesia with Jim Leap and others at COS. So my work in the Green Revolution, though, expanded beyond that, because the Green Revolution, it's an intensification process. It's bringing high-yielding seed varieties with more fertilizers, irrigation water, other chemicals into the system. And when you're scaling that system up across large landscapes, you're bound to have environmental impacts. And I teamed up with Pam Matson, our old dean of the School of Earth here, and others in the Yaqui Valley. Steve Grelick is here too, and David. A number of us worked for about a decade or 12 years in the Yaqui Valley studying the environmental impacts. With Pam, it was really understanding how these intensive processes change the whole biogeochemical cycle of nitrogen globally, not just locally. And so as I was thinking more about the environmental impacts of these intensive systems, I couldn't help but go back to aquaculture and say, are there lessons we can take from the Green Revolution to aquaculture, to the Blue Revolution? And that was Indonesia that was expanding very rapidly into shrimp systems along the coastal areas. Even in Yaqui Valley, shrimp was popping up along the coastal areas, a lot of disease problems. And this galvanized me to start work with a network of scholars from around the world that we convened here at Stanford to start looking into it. Our first paper in Science was looking at the really rapid rise in shrimp and salmon farming at the expense of nature, at the expense of the environment. Producers did not pay for that. And we quickly then went on and did a much more rigorous assessment of is aquaculture a net gain or loss to world fish supplies? When you think about fish feeds coming into feeding global aquaculture, on balance, is this positive or negative? Turns out it was positive when you look at all fed and non-fed species, but there were serious concerns, and this led to 2 decades of work in individual components of this. I thought it would be interesting 20 years later to go back. The first paper was in Nature, got the cover of Nature. I thought it would be good to go back to Nature and say, what did we learn after 20 years? Is it more sustainable? Again, with a global network of scholars in this area, all from different disciplines. So how sustainable is aquaculture? This is clear that fish is used as a feed in aquaculture. But what we found after 20 years was incredible improvements. The amount of biomass you got out of the feeds that you put in improved immensely through trimmings from there was much more substitution of plant and animal products and proteins, trimmings from fish processing plants, so it brought that wild fish component way down. And we used a metric of fish in and fish out, which was just saying, in 1997, it took 1.9 tons of wild fish to produce 1 ton of fed farm fish. That wasn't a good ratio, but by 2017, it was 0.028. So really big gains. But what are the substitution areas that we saw? So what's in the fish you eat when you're sitting at the table is salmon that are produced not just from anchovy meal, feather meal, poultry meal, ethanol waste, dry distiller grains, as well as soy and corn. And what really became apparent is that anchovy meal is so expensive, the fact that wild fish are so much more expensive than all these byproducts that you're getting out of the rest of the food system. So now we're really working very effectively in the circular economy, and it's just cheaper to have all these other wastes that are protein, that add protein to the feeds. And so although the industry says we got more sustainable because we cared about sustainability, it was the economics that was driving this transition. Now, other promising inputs like insect feeds and microalgae, bacteria, other single-cell organisms are coming into the market. But again, the nutritional quality has to work for fish and the economics has to work. So scaling these things is really challenging, and it really comes down to a lot of the economics. So, in summary, on the 20-year retrospective, there's a lot of innovation, but still a lot of problems listed here. And I think the one I'm worried most about is diseases, the use of antimicrobials, and antimicrobial resistance that you're seeing all over. That's kind of the Wild West of aquaculture right now. So the key policy role for siting really comes in. So what do I contribute to all of this? And with all my colleagues, I've written and published in a lot of different fora here, books, papers, and at the regional and field level, and global assessments. So just to give a couple of examples, the Blue Food Assessment as a whole over those 3 years really, we got 9 papers in Nature journals that really did the empirics of everything from nutrition to climate to smallholder actors. In addition to policy briefs and report for decision makers to the UN and a summary in the Journal of Food Security. But then at the local level and the field level, I just want to kind of wrap up here by saying that most of my students, graduate students, come from the Global South, and they want to actually learn about food systems because they want to go back to their countries and work in this field. And I have them all go out into the field. This is something that's really difficult for graduate students because it takes a lot of time. And, but give you 2 examples. Safari Fang from China is looking at improving the sustainability of feeds in yellow croaker. This was the largest capture fishery. They fished it all out in China, and now it's the most valuable aquaculture industry in China. But also globally, the world's biggest consumer of trash fish, quote unquote. Trash fish are, fishermen just go out and non-targeted, catch all the fish in the ocean, put it on the dock, and it goes to all these uses, including yellow croaker farms. And it's not a very sustainable way to manage the oceans. And so she's doing research, analyzing the economic and behavioral constraints as well as opportunities for transitioning to more sustainable feeds, like the ones I've mentioned earlier, through field data and regression analysis. And then, I don't know why this is. In Kenya, Frida Nagundi is looking at smallholder aquaculture, small and medium-sized aquaculture in Kenya. Kenya has really lagged aquaculture production, and smallholders really have no information in terms of extension service to improve productivity and incomes and market success. So there's an emergence of digital platforms to help them get better inputs and improve their production practices. And she's analyzing 2 existing platforms that are being used against a control using field data and statistical analysis again. So it's really interesting just to learn from what's happening in the field. And I'll wrap up by just saying, when I think about my work and the research and engagement that it has led me to, I never think about, I'm sitting in Stanford, I'm going to create this paper, and I'm going to inform others. I mean, I learn almost everything I know from being out in the field and talking to people. And so it's really a two-way street. Some of the efforts that I'm involved in through the Aspen Global Change Institute, I chair the board there, but I'm also co-leading an effort with Steve Davis and Jem Burney on net zero emissions in food systems. I'm on the supervisory board of a company, Aquaspark, which is a holding company that invests capital in other companies along the supply chain for sustainable aquaculture, digital technologies, alternative feeds, and so forth. And so I can bring my knowledge into the investment portfolios and strategies for that company to help transform the industry. And Delta 40, an interesting company run by a Stanford undergrad that moved to Nairobi with her husband, and Lindsay and Nick Handler run a company, Delta 40, that is a venture capital fund that is really geared towards giving a lift up to entrepreneurs in the climate space. A lot of those people are in the food system space. They're just wrapping up a big food system innovation network workshop right now. And they have been really valuable in thinking about how to get the private sector involved. So when I think about what I want to do with the school, the Doerr School here, it's to bring these things in, these efforts in the private sector and NGO efforts into the Doerr School and go back and forth in identifying projects. I'm on 2 accelerator proposals. Kristen's here running one on seaweed is one of them. There's an emerging flagship program on food. Jim Leap and David LaBelle are running. Obviously, my work's going to fit into that. And I think the emergence of the Sustainable Society Institute, especially when we think about the Blue Food Initiative in Indonesia that requires government agencies from all different agencies to come and improve nutrition and the environment, is a good example. So I will leave it at that and look forward to talking to you.